So this is a video covering the therapies of autism. So remember, there are no treatments for autism, just therapies that help people with autism live kind of more effective lives, and support them as they go through kind of things. So the first one is applied behavioural analysis, ABA therapy. What ABA focuses on is changing the behaviour of children with autism. Behaviour analysts examine the causes and the consequences of a behaviour. They then develop interventions based on that information, and we use it a lot of time to help people with kind of communication problems or social skills. Remember, what it basically does is use operant conditioning, which we'll get to in a second. So it operates on that ABC model, that there's activating events, behavioural, and then consequences of those behaviours. So antecedent is kind of the A, it's the start of it. There's got something that's kind of triggered certain behaviours. And then you've got the consequences of those behaviours. And again, we use operant conditioning. So what we basically do is reward good behaviours. We pick behaviours, so the analysts will kind of analyse it and pick behaviours that we want to see and build up a reward schedule or a reward pattern. Every time the child shows this certain behaviour, they are given a reward. For example, the effective ways of interacting with other people. Any behaviours that are seen as unacceptable, whether it's tantrums, whether it's biting, whether it's anything like that, are ignored. There is absolutely no reinforcement, no attention is given, anything like that. So they stop being given attention for that, and they're giving rewards and attention for good behaviours, and the idea is that the children with autism will start to show more of these good behaviours. And what we do is we constantly analyse the behaviours that are going on to make sure that this is having the right effect, and we can tailor it, we can change it, which makes ABA reflective and dynamic. So often this will involve breaking down complicated skills like social interactions into smaller steps. So you break them down into tiny step-by-step processes, and you can reward each of those step-by-step processes throughout the program, which means that there is a slow kind of build-up of these skills that the kids are being rewarded for. We see lots of learning principles in here: reinforcement, shaping, so we get kind of more and more in line with what we are looking for. And as you go on, you don't reward the children for doing kind of the easier things anymore, only when they're showing the kind of more complete skill that we're looking for, or the complete activity or action. And we often see some generalization where they then start applying these to other situations. So for example, we might teach children appropriate ways of getting attention, how not to interrupt conversations, how not to throw tantrums. So the steps involved are choosing the behavior, the skill, or the deficit, identifying what goals we're aiming to get, finding a way to measure that behavior, measure them beforehand, design and implement the intervention. So what rewards will they get? What behaviours will they show to get those rewards? Measure how effective it's been, and then kind of alter or change it as it goes on. So this can be done either in a structured or an unstructured environment, so the real world, or in like role play. And again, it's often done in discrete trial trainings where it is kind of little complex behaviours broken down into shorter, smaller steps. And it's good for teaching playing, communication, daily living skills, food refusal, and self-injury. So what I've got is a few so Lovus is an example of this, where I looked at it in an educational setting and found that children who had went through ABA who had autism were kind of less likely to be in special education. They were more likely to be in mainstream schooling, or in the mainstream classes within the school. Next slide. Cebula looked at the effects on families, and it showed that there was kind of more positive interactions between the children and the parents, and between their brothers and sisters when the child was going through ABA. Gale is, remember, an example that we use a lot, because they give the exact kind of structure of how you might do this with food refusal. When they analysed it, they found that a lot of the food refusal behaviour was because the child was rewarded for it with attention and being given other food. So what they did was they kind of set up the situation where food was held on the spoon for 30 seconds in front of the child for 20 presentations, regardless of how the child responded. If they were disruptive and if they refused to eat it, the parents ignored them and held the food. So remember, we do interviews to see if this is effective. And they were used to kind of assess what needs to change. Warren again showed that this is a promising, beneficial therapy, but it's too early to kind of say because the results aren't consistent. Strengths and weaknesses. Again, it only shows benefits over a short period of time. When children stop being rewarded, that may not continue. It does tie into what we know about operant conditioning, so it's got a good theoretical background. It involves the parents, and the parents can be an active process, which makes them feel kind of better about the situation, more confident. But it might need promoting to show behaviour, so don't always show it. Prompting, not promoting. So the child may not always show the positive behaviours, and they'll need somebody there to kind of remind them, you need to do this to get the reward. It might not end up generalising to other situations. It's very determinist and social controlling, and it can be costly and time consuming. It depends on what the rewards are, but it's definitely kind of requires round the clock kind of analysis and support. If the child is doing good behaviours and not being rewarded for them because the parent isn't there to do it, or the therapist isn't there to do it, we might see a drop in those behaviours. There are other evaluation points she's looked at and we got in our notes, so make sure to review them as well. CBT is the second one, and it's very similar to CBT for depression and schizophrenia, but just with a different set of skills. So remember, generally CBT, we haven't got it here, but generally CBT is used for people, and it's all about combating the way of thinking. It goes through the exact same process, so it's often one-to-one, individualized therapy tailored to that individual's negative thinking or maladaptive thinking, and it is all about changing the way that they think. So we've already mentioned this essentially. It's often used particularly for children with autism who have a lot of anxiety as a way of combating those thoughts and helping them deal with them. And there's various reasons children with autism might have extra anxiety, which are some of these things, which aren't as important. What we do is we adapt the CBT to the children with autism. So we might do things like using pictures of thermometers to show kind of how anxious they are, rather than using verbal cues and scoring systems where, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, because children with autism may have problems kind of coping or understanding or dealing with that, we might use a visual system instead. Other adaptations of CBT method, again, you revise the general CBT, and that covers for a lot of this, are things like skill training, using social coaching, training independence, so not just challenging the thought, but adding in these extra skills as well. But a lot of it involves cognitive restructuring. Again, we identify the thoughts and the ideas which are kind of damaging, which aren't giving the best behaviours, and we challenge them. And we replace them with more adaptive thoughts, with better, more positive ways of thinking. So Jeff Wood identifies these three-phased process. He is a doctor with an NHS who does CBT for children with autism. We might also teach them thinking skills as a way of restructuring. So again, it's that kind of changing the way that they think about the situation. It's the same as the challenging of negative thoughts within depression. Some studies that show that this has been very effective. And then strengths and weaknesses, again, it's individual based. It teaches skills that they can use in the long term, but it does require a therapist. It's costly and time consuming. The children with autism have difficulty doing it. It's a hard therapy to do, especially for children with autism. And then the usual things about CBT would also apply, how it's difficult to measure thought processes, and so on. So that's a very quick fly through them. We will spend more time on it in class before the exam, and that is a brief summary.